Besides the man with the broken leg, do you remember any other casualties that you saw?
Oh yeah, I saw one gunner's mate. I knew him pretty well. His name was Bloodworth. I'll never forget it. And he was sitting there, and this leg was blown off. We were just right about there. This leg was there, but the other leg was from the foot and the ankle was gone. And he was just sitting there. He didn't know what to do. And I think he got off, but I didn't see him after that. But and then I was in the life raft, in the Higgins boat going back to Guadalcanal, and this one, he was an ensign. I think he was sitting there facing me, and he didn't have any injuries other than concussion. Hit so hard beside his head it popped his eyeball out. And his eyeball was hanging out down on his cheek here. And he kept saying, my eye feels funny. And I said, oh, don't rub it, don't rub it. He didn't realize it wasn't even in the eye socket, It wasn't really hurting him that much, I guess, but he couldn't. So I can't really see how that eye. And I saw him later on the hospital ship, and they had taken that eye out and put a glass eye in. He was pretty happy. He said he was going to the States. He was getting discharged. But some, you'd seen him with arms off or legs, and it was, the blast can really mess you up. And there was a lot of them that were hurt real bad, a lot worse than I was. Most of those real bad ones, they went back to the States, though, to get discharged. They didn't stay out. I stayed out there. Admiral Halsey, who was the admiral in charge of that area, ordered whatever ships available to go up and take supplies and Marines up to Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal was the first island our troops had landed on. They were all Marines out there. There wasn't too much Army out there. It was mostly all Marines. And we were taking more Marines up to help them because the Japanese kept coming back, trying to run them off again. So we took supply ships and Marines up to Guadalcanal, and there was 13 of our ships. There were 5 cruisers, and there was 2 and I think 2 or 3 light cruisers and about 5 heavy cruisers. San Francisco was our flagship. And then there were 8 destroyers. And at that time, it was early in the war, not many of the ships had radar. The Cushing happened to have radar. And I was a pointer up on the gun director, which is the director that's up on top of the bridge, where they direct the fire when you're in automatic with all the 5-inch guns. So they had a radar scope right in front of where I was sitting as I was a pointer, and I fired the guns. But I thought, they'd been having trouble with it, so everywhere I looked in the radar screen, I was seeing pips, which were little targets. And I told the gunnery officer, I think there's something wrong with this screen, because everywhere we train, I see pips and they're targets. But then I stood up and looked over the top of the director, and there was, I don't know, 20 or 30 ships out there. And this was between Tulagi and Guadalcanal, which is only about 10 miles apart. So all those ships were milling around. And I had just come on the mid-watch, so it was real dark. It was all a night battle. And so they told us to train out and open on a target, open fire. So we started firing on a Japanese destroyer, and we were hitting it because they were all very close. And it was totally burning, but so they told us to train out the other way, which was good we did, because about the time we trained it out starboard, we took a direct hit on the gun director, and it knocked it off of the pedestal, and it killed all the people on the front of the director, but I was on the back side, so I didn't even get a scratch. So we figured there's no use staying up there, so they told us to report down on the main deck. So I started to go down to the bridge, which was right below, and I heard somebody yelling he was hurting, and it was another shipmate had a real bad broken leg. So I said, get on my back and I'll take you down to where you can get some help. So he got on my back and I took him down to the chart house desk, which was 2 decks down. And in the meantime, we were getting hit quite repeatedly because everyone that went by us, they'd take a shot at us. But anyway, they had first aid kits all around on the deck in different places, so I found a first aid kit, and it had little syrettes of morphine, and he was having such a fit about hurting that I thought I'd give him a little shot of morphine. And so I bent over, which probably saved my life, because when I bent over to give him the shot of morphine, we took a direct hit on the chart house, which was right behind me. Well, it hit me too, but if I'd have been standing straight up, it'd have probably been fatal, but because I had a life jacket on, it was just full of shrapnel, little pieces. But anyway, it knocked me out, and when I came to, I don't really know how long I was out, but I took one hit behind my left ear, and I guess that's what knocked me out. And when I tried to get up, my left leg wouldn't move, and I couldn't move it at all. And it was dark, so I couldn't really tell what was wrong. But he was telling me to help him on down to the main deck, and I said, I can't carry you no more. I can't walk. And so we'll just have to crawl down. And he said, no, he wasn't going to do that. So I said, well, I am. So I crawled down and went head first down the ladder down to the main deck, and I was sitting on a bit on the quarter deck, and because the whole ship was burning pretty much by then. And somebody came by, and I says, what's going on? And he says, well, they said to abandon ship, and I'm looking for another life jacket. And here they had already abandoned ship on the starboard side, and I was sitting on the port side. So I said, well, if they said abandon ship, I'm going to abandon. So I went over the side. I made a mistake there because that was the side where a lot of oil was running out of the side of the ship. And it was I was just so soaked with oil, nobody could even recognize me. But I'd try to swim away from the ship, and as it would roll, it would pull me back. And that's when my swimming helped me. I swam out about, maybe a couple 100 yards. I had a life jacket, of course, Cape Hawk life jacket. And I was the only one over on that side. And it was pitch black except for the fires. And the oil on the top of the water was burning all around. But I floated around out there, and I could look back and see the Cushing. As the ready boxes would catch fire, they'd blow up, and a lot of debris would come out, so that's why I got back from it. But I'd been there, I don't know just how long, and I saw out of the corner of my eye, I saw something look yellow, and I didn't know what it was, so I swam over to it finally, and it was a little small life preserver, donut-shaped, type life preserver. It only hold 4 people, and it was upside down. But I managed to get underneath it and get the paddles out and started trying to paddle it, but paddling one of those is like paddling in circles. And then I finally picked up 3 people. That's all it would hold. And 2 of them were wounded so bad said they couldn't paddle, so the other person, he said he had a broken wrist, but he still was able to paddle a little. And so we paddled. It was probably maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning by then. So we paddled all the rest of the night, and we was headed toward a light over on Guadalcanal, and we were headed for that. And luckily, when it got daylight, we found out we were headed to where the Japanese were. So we saw a lot of survivors over another direction, so we headed over there, and a lot of them were survivors off of the Cushing. So we was there for quite a while, a whole group of us. There was maybe, I don't know, maybe 30 or more people. A lot of them were wounded real bad, but they had life jackets, and pretty soon we saw Higgins boats, which are a landing craft, coming out from Guadalcanal, and they were picking up people, survivors of other ships, because of the 13 of us that went in, 8 of us got sunk. One of the light aircraft carriers had the Sullivan brothers on it. They were 5 brothers, and that was before they told them not to have relatives on the same ship. But I think 3 got killed the first night, and the other 2 got killed the next day when they were towing the Juno, which was a light aircraft cruiser. They were hauling it down to get repaired, and a submarine hit it, and all the rest of the crew practically was lost. I think there was 14 survivors out of the whole crew. But anyway, it was quite a while. It was late afternoon when we finally got that. They'd lower the bow down, and they'd pull us in, and the water, of course, would rush in too, because they were used to going up on the beach. And they'd put the bow up and pump the bilges out, and then they'd let it down, pull us more in. And they did it real quick, and a lot of them were hurting real bad. So anyway, they took us then, and when they got loaded, we went over to Guadalcanal, and they had shacks set up as a temporary hospital for survivors. And they took us in, and I'd been hit in the left leg, and it had cut all the tendons behind my leg, and I couldn't move it. But it had made kind of a hole in the back of my legs, and they poured it full of sulfa and wrapped it up, oil and all. And no one looked at it again for 2 weeks, I don't think. And they wrapped my head up. I had a cut on I'd get a little hit in my head. And then they spread our stretchers out, because the Japs would come over and drop bombs, and they didn't want us all grouped together at the hospital. But anyway, after one day, then they took us over to a dugout, which would hold about, maybe a dozen stretchers or in shelves underground. And that was the most miserable time, because it was no ventilation down there. It was real hot, a lot of mosquitoes, and I was allergic to tetanus shot, and they gave me a tetanus shot in the arm, and it swelled up to about like a football. But after, it seemed like forever. It was probably only 2 or 3 days. They said they were going to evacuate us down to Espiritu Santos, which is islands right below the Solomon Islands. And so finally they came, and they put us in ambulances and took us over to the airstrip, and they were starting to load us into the plane, and they got about half loaded, and a Jap gun up on the hill started dropping shells over onto where we were parked, where the plane was parked. So they said, well, we can't take off here. So they took us off the plane, put us back in the ambulance, took us over to another little dirt strip, and we finally got in the air. But it was kind of a close call, because they had a condition red going on. The planes were coming in from the north when we were going out on the south. And but we didn't, they stopped from Henderson Field, which was the main target on Guadalcanal. So we flew on down to Espiritu Santos, and they put us in a little, it was like a Quonset hut, and I was still covered with oil, and nobody had friends that walked by, and they didn't even. I'd say hello, and they'd look like, "Who are you?" They didn't know who I was. But I was in this one room they put me in, and I saw a set of crutches over there, and I thought, "Oh, I'm going to take a shower." So I managed to get those crutches, and I got in the shower, and that was the first shower I'd had in about 2 weeks. I got a lot of the oil off, but not all of it. But anyway, we stayed there for maybe a week, and then the Solace, which was a hospital ship, came in to Espiritu Santos and picked up all the wounded from all the different ships, not just our ship, but all the other ships. And the ones that were going to take more than 90 days to get partway healed would go to New Zealand. To anybody who was going to take longer than that, they would send them back to the States. So they flew back, and we got the hospital ship. It took me more than 90 days to get well, but that's where I went, was Auckland, New Zealand. And I was they operated on my leg, well, 3 times, I think. And stayed there, maybe 4 or 5 months. Yeah, there was one thing I didn't mention, that after I got off the ship and I had a tourniquet on my leg to keep, because it was bleeding quite a bit. And I had found a rubber tourniquet in the first aid kit when I was working on that fellow that had a broken leg. And I figured, here I'm letting blood out in the water, and every day we used to see big sharks swimming around. And I worried more about sharks than I did about anything. But I think all the fires and the noise scared them away pretty much. The next day they came back pretty bad. But I heard stories where the guys had trouble with them. But I didn't, of course it was the middle of the night too, so that helped. But I didn't like that idea of floating around with a bloody leg. Sharks would smell it forever. Yeah. But lucky I didn't happen, so that was good.